Politically Conscious episode 27 pops up Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time as our experts return to unpack Trump's tariff win. Did he solve a crisis he created? We'll expose the drama behind the $400 million jet gifted to him. Is it even constitutional? Plus, we dissect Rodney Hinton's tragic slaying of an innocent officer and Stephen Miller's jaw-dropping call to suspend habeas corpus over immigration. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. What's up, everybody? It's your mental activist, Montoya Smith, with episode 27 of Politically Conscious. Our brother, Shelly Winters, is back. So we're going to make these intros real brief because we got a lot to unpack and so much going on in the political world. If you are a first-time watcher of the Politically Conscious show, we basically react to political cuts from around the internet and give you our thoughts from the left and right of things. I'm your moderator, and I consider myself an independent. Emil is my brother who's on the left, and Shelly Winters is my brother on the right, just to keep it real brief and simple. But Emil, tell them who you are real quick. We'll do the same thing with Shelly from the Shelly Winters show. Thank you for being black with us, brother, and we'll get started with Politically Conscious episode 27. Go ahead, Emil.
Yeah, this is Emil Bryan. I'm a political consultant. My job is to help my candidates tell the truth. I've helped congressional candidates, I've advised people who are running for Senate, state, local elections. My goal as a consultant is to remind my candidates that the people can handle the truth, and bad news does not get better with time.
Absolutely. Shelly Winters, you don't really need an introduction, but if you will, brother, say who you are, tell them how they can listen to you, because you are famous not only in Georgia but across the nation as you keep building up your radio show. But tell them who you are, and we'll get started with our first cut.
Shelly Winter. I'm a host of the Shelly Winter Show on 95.5 WSB, Atlanta's News and Talk, 7 to 9 p.m. every Monday through Friday. And I'll be on tonight at 7 o'clock. And you can listen, if you're not in Georgia or in your car, you can listen at WSBradio.com.
Love it. Let's go to our first cut. Emil, I'll have you react to this very first cut, and we'll get this show started and do what we do.
I hope everybody had a great Mother's Day weekend. But if you drank too much at brunch, you missed a lot. In 4 days, we got about 4 years of action. Trump signed a trade deal with Great Britain, then brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, freed the final American hostage from Hamas, slashed drug prices, and now he's on the way to the Middle East. But China was the big kahuna.
Yesterday, we achieved a total reset with China after productive talks in Geneva. Both sides now agreed to reduce the tariffs imposed after April 2nd to 10% for 90 days as negotiators continue in the larger structural issues.
So we were in a toxic relationship with the Chinese. We got hooked on their cheap junk, and it was making us needy. You never want to be the needy one in a relationship. It's not healthy for you or the other person. So we're letting them down easy. Besant took the Chinese to a secluded Swiss villa overlooking Lake Geneva and locked the door. Scott sweet-talked them for about 14 hours and then convinced them that it was their idea to break up. We can still be friends, but we need some space.
I would say one of the big takeaways from this weekend, the United States will continue a strategic rebalancing in many areas that were exposed as supply chain weaknesses during COVID. The consensus from both delegations this weekend is neither side wants a decoupling.
America is going to take some time and focus on ourselves, because the way things were going, we were being taken advantage of.
In January 2020, President Trump produced a template. We had an excellent trade agreement with China, and the Biden administration chose not to enforce it. The Chinese delegation basically told us that once President Biden came into office, they just ignored their obligations.
So China had a 4-year hall pass because our president was in a brain fog. Or did Joe let it slide because Hunter got bribed? The stock market loved the good news. Dow's up over 1,000 points. It's higher now than it was before Liberation Day. Now the panicans understand the art of the deal.
This, to me, is a signal that there is maybe a different kind of President Trump happening. President Trump seems to be looking for less confrontational style, and this may be the beginning of what I regard as being kind of a little more politics as usual, not for Trump.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
We're still keeping 25% tariffs on key industries like steel, aluminum, automobiles, and pharmaceuticals. COVID taught us we can't rely on China during a crisis. Everyone's been beating on us like a piñata and watching the candy fall out. We've been paying more for.
So, report from Fox News. Your thoughts, Emil, on that cut?
So let me just get past the spin and focus on the facts. The facts are that the tariffs are only for a 90-day pause, and they went from 145% down to 30%. Prior to all of this rabble-rousing, riff-raff nonsense that happened, the tariffs were at 10%. So the tariff is still higher than it was originally. So you could call that a win if you want to, but it's like I bandaged the shot I put in my own foot. Always, always, always do I go back to the genesis of this problem, which has nothing to do with China, because China did not put a gun to America's head and say, bring us your jobs. Chinese companies were courted by American companies, and the problem still exists. That is, American companies are still shipping jobs overseas because it's cheaper to produce in China. Not a problem until this president in this administration says, I don't like it. But he hasn't solved the core problem, which is, how do you stop American businesses from seeking the cheapest source of labor they can find? That is not why Americans don't have. That is why Americans don't have jobs today in manufacturing, and it's not about tariffs.
Shelley, your thoughts to that cut, or anything Emil had to say?
Well, with all due respect to my brother Emil, I got to say this. I came on my show Monday saying the exact same thing that Jesse Waters said, and his show is in the evening. An hour before mine. But the fact of the matter is, though, last weekend was huge victories for Trump. Now, the spin really is in saying he created a problem and then fixed the problem he created. The problem, as Emil just pointed out, has always been there. The problem is we have companies here in this country who export jobs to other countries because it's cheap labor. That's number one. The number two thing is we also have countries that slap tariffs on us, and we're the biggest consumers. And so that's the problem that he's trying to fix. Now, we can argue with whether tariffs is the way to fix it or whether they work or not. No one knows if it's going to work because it's really never been done. And the examples that they use when it's been done has been in the teens and the 20s and 30s. Well, we weren't a global economic powerhouse in the teens, the 20s and 30s. So right now, nobody knows on either side, right or left. If anybody tells you this is the best way, it's going to be a giant win, they don't know. And anybody that tells you the sky is falling is the worst thing ever, they don't know. But this past weekend, to respond to the cut, it was major victories for President Trump. And the sad part about it is that the media, which told me 3 months ago the sky was falling, then you play Jim Cramer, and he's like, oh, wow, the sky's not falling. But now, so everybody pivots, right, from, oh, wow, the sky didn't fall out, the China didn't dump all, shelves are not empty. And then they pivot to, oh, well, look, he's fixing a problem he created. Well, if he's fixing the problem that he created, why didn't anything happen that you said was going to happen? Prices are down. Gas is down. China is back to the negotiating table. They're talking to us. We're talking to them. The Britain agreement. I mean, those are our staunchest allies, so that's not surprising. And the markets are up. We've wiped out that loss, the crash. I told everybody that would listen, buy the dip. Right now, you're up the percentage that if you would have just bought the dip. And he even told you, buy the dip. And many people just stood on the sidelines selling it, yelling and screaming, and pivoting to, oh, he's insider trading. No, whether he is or not, if an insider trader told you to buy something, wouldn't you do it? You won't get in trouble. He may go to jail, but you're not going to get in trouble. So, I mean, it's just, we've got to understand. Let me say this, and I'll go back, let it come back to you. The hatred for Trump is so visceral. And I'm not talking to Emil, because Emil's just a Democrat. There's a difference between a Democrat who just doesn't agree and people who hate on a visceral level. The visceral hate for Trump is really impeding a lot of people to have some success either in their businesses or their lives, period. And I think that's the bigger conversation to have. A perfect example, all my friends who happen to be African-American who trade, they are smiling right now. They're absolutely positively smiling because they all bought undervalued, temporarily underpriced companies that they knew the real value of, and they bought it 5-6% less, and now they've made that money in less than 30 days. They're ecstatic. And so I think that we've got to start to take our emotions out of this and just follow him and see what happens. But I don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs, but I see the early results are that they are not going to be the destructive reasons of the destructive mechanisms on this economy.
Yeah, it's one thing that you pointed out, and I think if I'm understanding you, Shelley, and Emil, of course, jumping on this as well. But again, if we say if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. What I think I heard, one thing I heard, I think I caught in what you were saying, Shelley, was this: when you were talking about the particular stock guy cut that was a part of the cut, he was highlighting that he doesn't highlight the transition to what they thought was going to happen. They just flip to, oh, it's good now, and you're highlighting that there's actually a level of dishonesty and not transitioning, say, oh, we thought this was going to happen, but this is actually what happened. Like that would be a proper way to make that transition versus just saying, oh, it's bad now, or oh, it's good now. And then maybe if something else bad happened, you just jump to the extremes and you're not really serving your purpose in the media to explain it if you're the stock guy. I think that's what I kind of heard you say.
Absolutely. Jim Cramer.
The transition is hurting us as the American people for what we think we're hearing.
Right. Jim Cramer was the loudest and most critical of the financial guys, was one of the loudest and most critical people of this 2 months ago. And for him to sit there quietly and act like he wasn't. But let's be honest, Jim Cramer's been wrong on a lot of things. Most investors. For years.
He's been up and down.
Right. Most investors do the opposite of what Jim Cramer says. You know, he reminds me of a sports talk guy who calls sports on the radio and is wrong all the time. You know,
he's entertaining and he's educational. As long as you don't trust him to buy or sell anything, he will teach you about the stock market. The thing is, Montoya, I will give Shelley's talking points the props they deserve in the context of Hamas. I think that was a big W. The UK, as Shelley mentioned, that's 100%, just a special relationship, as we call it. So that was really not in jeopardy. But the thing about China is that there are some lagging indicators that we haven't seen the effect of. And Trump's deal it doesn't preempt them. It just doesn't show up the way that it could have had those deals played out. And the reason why I say that is because in April, we're halfway through May now. In April, traffic from Chinese commercial ports is down 27%. That means there's a gap in the trade from China that's going to matriculate through the markets. Now, the markets can absorb some of that, and so that big gap might get smaller, but there's going to be a problem. So what happens is you get a 60 or 90-day lag. A lot of people, knowing these tariffs were coming, bought a lot of stuff and filled their warehouses to the brim before the tariffs were enacted, which means they had a buffer for the kind of shocks we're feeling. What Shelley's talking about, in my opinion, is volatility. That doesn't mean that you should be, it's market timing. And I'm not a big fan of market timing. I'm a big fan of buy and hold, which means that you buy today, you hold, and you dollar cost average, and people can look up those words if they want to understand them better. But the point here is that I'm not going to mark a W for volatility, because just like he fixed it, he can unfix it. These are not permanent. These are 90-day pauses, which means sometime between now and 90 days from now, if there's not a permanent deal in place, and I'm afraid that a permanent deal means nothing to this administration, he could change it again. And that's the volatility that I'm not asking people to bank on. I'm not going to wait for the president to tell me to buy or sell on a signal that is not, consistent. I need more data from other indicators besides the White House before I make some investments.
That makes sense. Let me throw this in. I love what you're saying, and I respect what you're saying. I want to juxtapose it against what I think I hear Shelley saying and what you're saying. I hear Shelley consistently saying nobody has the answer on the tariffs. So in a sense of what you're saying, I think if Shelley, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you can respect everything Emil's saying, highlighting and being concerned about how the tariffs themselves specifically affect anything. I think Shelley just highlighting that in a sense, what's happened thus far ends up being a win for the president on a political level, not directly related to the tariffs. And the reason I say that is because Shelley keeps highlighting nobody knows with the tariffs. So I don't think he's leaning into the tariffs and saying that this volatility is a good thing. He's just highlighting what the actual win is up until this point. And I just feel like what you're talking about isn't juxtaposed against what he's saying. Shelley, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm just trying to.
No, you're absolutely right. You said it better than I could.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly.
Yeah, you said it better than I said.
All right, super cool. Let's go to another cut. Oh, matter of fact, before we go to another cut, let me show y'all this. And again, it's just trying to weed through the actual propaganda. I saw this as someone who Shelley says is a win. This guy, I don't know, y'all probably know him better than I do. Mac McDermott says, for those confused on the China tariff news, he says Trump caved and got zero in return. No manufacturing moved to the U.S. 30% tariff is still a huge tax on Americans. 90-day pause still causes uncertainty. Trump lost all negotiating leverage. I think the first four of these is basically what Emil said. He's highlighting in his opinion that Trump lost all negotiating leverage. I don't know if that's true or not. I was curious what both of you might have to say. Just a one-line thought to this, because I want to move on to the next cut, but I just wanted to at least share it and get one thought from both of you. Just one line.
President Trump represents the biggest economy in the world. He has not lost all negotiating leverage. He's lost a lot of credibility, but he's not lost leverage.
Shelley,
and also the big news that came out of that meeting, Scott Bessen's meeting, to Emil's earlier point, was not about moving manufacturing back to America. That's not on China's role. You don't negotiate with China that GM is going to manufacture more in America. You're negotiating with China to get GM to be able to sell more cars in China, which helps GM back home to hire more people back home. So that post was ridiculous.
Hey, there we go. That's what we're here for. Let's play this cut, and Shelley, I'll have you react to this cut first.
At least we're finally getting to address, in a substantive manner, Trump's chaotic stewardship of what was the world's most stable economy, and how Americans are going to have to sacrifice financially and tamp down their consumerist impulse. And that is what has driven so much of our economy, and I guess our waste. And I'm sure the president will use this interview with Welker to cheerlead the effort to a more financially responsible future for all of us.
We're going to have a big, beautiful parade.
A military parade?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We're going to celebrate our military. We have the greatest military in the world.
What's the price tag? Do you know?
Peanuts compared to the value of doing it.
We can't afford not to do it! Why don't you believe in me? If you hadn't spent so much on dolls and pencils, we wouldn't even be talking about this. And see. But this is the brilliance of Trump. In the same interview where he says to Americans, sorry about your Christmas, suck it up, he talks about a $90 million parade that just so happens to fall on his birthday and is totally worth it.
We have the greatest missiles in the world. We have the greatest submarines in the world. We have the greatest army tanks in the world. We have the greatest weapons in the world. And we're going to celebrate it.
I don't know, Mr. President, if you know how submarines work. But dragging them down Pennsylvania Avenue will most likely void the warranty.
Shelly, I'll let you respond to that one first.
Well, that interview was, I think, last week or the week before. I mean, Jon Stewart's a comedian. What he's saying is necessarily not wrong per se, but Trump wasn't necessarily telling people to cut back on the consumerism. He was responding to a question where everybody was telling him the sky was falling. So we now see the sky hasn't fallen. So the whole doll thing just becomes a soundbite. Look, if the concept of what we're doing is to cut through the propaganda, then I think that it becomes harder to do that if we're going to play pure propaganda as to react to. Not criticizing us, but just saying Jon Stewart is a comedian who's spreading pure propaganda in that clip. The military parade is also the celebration of the military's, I think, 200 years or something like that. We celebrate 250 years this year. 250 year, July 4th will be 250 years of America. So that celebration is going on all over the country. New York City is going to have tall ships going down the Hudson. That's going to cost them tens of millions of dollars. That is going to be spent, even though New York doesn't have the best financial situation. Chicago's doing something. Atlanta's, everybody's doing something to celebrate 250 years. Do I like the idea of a military parade? I get the idea. I'm a little torn. I don't want to look like China and Russia, and I don't want Trump in front of some grandstand saluting as they go by for 2 hours, because I think it's just a bad look. But I understand the concept of all of these celebrations and what we're doing. And the fact that it falls on his birthday, what does that got to do with anything? That's just his good luck. You know what I mean? So first they say Trump's throwing a parade for his birthday. Then when he tells you, no, it's a celebration for the military. Oh, but it's your birthday. Okay, so what am I supposed to do? Change my birthday? Change the birthday of American military? I mean, it's silly season. It really is silly season, and on both sides, to be honest with you. And when I see things like that, I just laugh and say, well, he's doing his job. He's a comedian first.
No, absolutely. And what happens is, for us, it's not even really a response to Jon Stewart, just to kind of highlight, we're playing the propaganda so that people can hear us highlight what's real and what's not, because what we both know happens, Shelley, generally speaking, most of us are too busy and don't have the capacity to necessarily be aware of certain things. Or I always say, because humans are naturally linear thinkers, if it just makes sense when you hear it, you won't think more about it. So that's so we do play a lot of propaganda for us.
Oh yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just want to make sure that that's very clear for somebody watching for the first time as well. Go ahead, Emil. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So 250 years for the Army is a big deal, and I expect them to celebrate. And yes, they will celebrate. And of course, the nation's birthday is on July 4th. There will be massive celebrations all around. So the question is this normal? And the answer is yes, it is normal to do military parades, especially on a milestone birthday like the United States Army's 250th anniversary celebration. It was born on 14 June 1775. It predates the nation, but that's not the issue people want to discuss. I know it's normal. The kind of parade it is, like the last big giant parade we had was in 1991 in Washington, D.C. It was the victory parade for celebrating the win in the Gulf War I. That was the last time we had a parade like that. Now, with the 250th Army celebration, should they do something? Of course they should. It would be crazy not to. What should it look like? I don't think it should have tanks. I don't think it should have all the big weapons of war. I think it should be what you would normally see in a large parade like this, with soldiers marching and bands and all that sort of stuff. However, the discretion belongs to the president in this case, and his birthday and the Army's birthday do fall on the exact same day. So whether or not it's true, he had 4 years to celebrate his birthday this way, and he chose not to. So on the big day, he chose to do it. I mean, just unpacking the propaganda, it's kind of normal to see a big celebration on the 250th anniversary of the Army.
So to y'all point, Jon Stewart does what he does, and this all makes sense for anybody who may have received that propaganda as, oh, wow, look at something that's being done. As y'all both were saying, it's very normal. Having been in the military, absolutely understand that. And it's going to be a pretty ticket for the 250th anniversary of the Army. That's just the reality. All right, let's play another cut.
I do want to respond to this comment that's popped up here.
All right, go ahead. Yeah. One of our watchers put.
Yeah, I do want to respond. I don't see the country being destroyed. Like I don't know where this listener or this viewer lives, but I don't see the country being destroyed. Now, if you think it's being destroyed, you've got to point out to me how it's being destroyed. I don't see it any differently. Life goes on. Everybody's still living. I don't see the most vulnerable being harmed. Someone's got to tell me how the most vulnerable are being harmed, specifically under this administration, versus the most vulnerable by definition are always being harmed. No matter what decision these countries, a major country like America makes, the most vulnerable by definition of being the most vulnerable are always being harmed. And so the key is, how do you move more people out of being most vulnerable to help them not be vulnerable anymore? Because by definition, they're always being harmed, whether it's Trump in office, Obama, Biden, Clinton, or Bush, whoever it is, they're always being harmed. That's why they're the most vulnerable.
Go ahead, Emil. I'll let you respond before I
Several businesses are going out of business because of tariffs. That's one. And the people that they employ are finding themselves unemployed. Black women in the United States have lost 106,000 jobs as of the last jobs report. That is a direct result of this administration doing harm to a very vulnerable population. Not to mention, there are people who are being threatened by mass, unwarranted, unbadged individuals called ICE we don't know if they're ICE or not. And we have information about at least one time a person who pretended to be a masked, badgeless ICE person walking into a jail and pulling someone out and not being questioned by the police. These are harms done to vulnerable people right now by this administration and its policies. This is not something that is happening every administration. And I agree with you, Shelley. The most vulnerable in this nation are always harmed by every administration and their policies. What I'm saying is there's an extra level of ugly being heaped upon them right now by this administration's policies.
And I'm gonna say
I would argue that if black women are the most educated, which I've been being told for the last 3 years, and if black women have the highest income in the black community, then they're by definition not the most vulnerable. The fact that 106,000 have lost their jobs, I can speak to the nearly 300,000 black men who have lost their jobs when NAFTA was signed by Clinton and they moved manufacturing out of this country. So, as I said, let's not get it all twisted and jump up and down and act like Trump is the first guy to do things that may harm people. If you're trying to fix a problem that's been going on in this country for nearly 40 years, as Emil said earlier, they moved manufacturing to other countries. And Bush won, Clinton, Bush won, Clinton, Obama, Biden, Trump, all let it happen. Trump comes along and he's trying to fix those problems. Yes, it's not going to happen overnight. No, it's not going to happen overnight. No, it's not going to be pretty. But we have allowed our people, the most vulnerable, as we say, to be trampled on through several administrations. And now all of a sudden to call this guy out for trying to fix the problems that allowed us to be trampled I think it's a little bit disingenuous. I really, really do.
I would disagree, but I understand that's not the nature of our show. We do unpack propaganda, but this is probably one where people are going to have to look for themselves at some of the data. Unemployment is up where it wasn't before, and real wages are down as they were before.
That's not true. Unemployment is up. That's it. No, wages are up. Wages are up, and unemployment is down. I just saw that CPI just came out 2 days ago.
I'll take that as wrong, but unemployment is definitely not down.
The unemployment is at 3.1%, and if it's anything, it's about flat, or maybe it's up a tick, but it's not up to where, I mean, it was unemployment was up in the fives.
Let me jump in real quick on this. Yeah, let me jump in real quick so we can go to another cut. What y'all are talking about now, just to give context, I'm the context guy. So the reality of unemployment having been so low over the last few years, I'm not saying this is okay. I'm not giving it to one administration or not, but if it ticks up a little bit when it's been the lowest it's ever been over the last 5 to 8 years, I don't know that we can make that in itself saying, oh, that's the most vulnerable. I don't like going to the extremes. And I don't think that when we go to the extremes in such a way that we're actually giving people valid consideration for things to think about. So I'm just kind of throwing that out that, yeah, even if it's up a tick, we're still at the lowest in history pretty much since the Obama administration, and it's continued to stay low since that time.
I do want to say one thing. That viewer called me a clown. I think it's kind of cool to be called a clown by a fine ass sister. She needs to leave her information in the messages. Leave your info in the instant message.
Don't get kicked out of your house because you're flirting on our show, brother.
I like to have this discussion in person, my dear sister.
Well, you crazy, brother. All right, let me keep this show going because I got a whole bunch of cuts I'm not even gonna get to because I'm messing with you, letting you guys kind of get off. But let me play this cut right here.
A $400 million gift. Okay, a jet. Listen, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all media outlets. Let's not do the dumb thing y'all do when you ask answers. I hate when I'm watching these networks. CNN does it the most, by the way. They ask answers. For example, they will say, is Donald Trump accepting this plane from Qatar illegal? Then they debate it. And then we, the people, are sitting back at home, not processing the information the way that we should because we are looking at it through the lens of, is Trump taking the plane wrong? Is Trump taking the plane right? When there is only one answer. It is absolutely wrong. Okay, the U.S. Constitution prohibits government officials from accepting gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state. Full stop. Now, Trump posted on social media. So the fact that the Defense Department is getting a gift free of charge of a 747 aircraft to replace the 40-year-old Air Force One temporarily in a very public and transparent transaction so bothers the crooked Democrats that they insist we pay top dollar for the plane. It's not just Democrats that I saw complaining about this. Okay, a lot of Trump's own supporters were complaining about this as well. And he said it's very public and transparent. Just because you sell dope, commit a murder, or rob somebody in broad daylight in front of a bunch of people doesn't make it any less of a crime. Okay, if it's one thing we've learned from politicians over the past decade is that corruption can be very public and very transparent. Okay, now in the Constitution, it says you are prohibited from accepting gifts from foreign states without the consent of Congress, aiming to prevent undue foreign influence on U.S. officials. So critics argue that accepting such a valuable gift like this jet, estimated at $400 million without congressional approval, could be unconstitutional. Now listen, I'm not about to sit up here and act like I'm some constitutional scholar, but outside of this being unconstitutional, widely illegal, why would you take a gift from people who fund terrorist organizations that kill a lot of Americans? And why, I say take the gift, I'm simply saying, why would you trust these people? When I say take the gift, I'm simply saying, why would you trust these people? Beware the noble gesture, okay? We know what that means, right? It's a warning that an act motivated by generosity may actually be a deceptive or manipulative move. Yes, appearances can be deceiving, and you should be cautious when evaluating someone's motives behind a gesture. First of all, these people are not gifting a $400 million plane out of the goodness of their heart. Okay, come on, Trump.
Emil, your turn to respond.
Charlemagne said it very clearly. Even if we accept the gift, let's assume the Department of Defense takes it. He can't use that as Air Force One. That would be insane. Air Force One has a communications and defensive suite that takes years to install, check, and make sure it works properly. And I don't care who the president is. I don't want them flying on a jet unless it is a dire national emergency and not one of these written emergencies that President Trump likes to declare. A dire national emergency where our existence is under threat should he be on anything other than the official Air Force One that we love and know. By the way, Air Force One is a call sign. It is not an airplane. The VC-25B is the actual nomenclature for the aircraft. It is the 747-400. It is about 30 years old. It took about 3 or 4 years to modify from its commercial state to the Air Force One state. So the 747-8 that Qatar is willing to give us, a $400 million gift, will need several modifications before it can be called or use the call sign of Air Force One. Again, it is a call sign, not an aircraft. The aircraft is a VC-25B, which is a specially modified 747-400 for the purpose of transporting the president, who needs constant communication with all the national command posts and authorities.
Shelley, your thoughts to that Breakfast Club cut?
Oh,
matter of fact, hold on. Before you go, let me throw out. I saw you put this up on social media, and I wanted to share it right before you give your answer. You highlighted. I saw you said Trump is just doing business. If a country can make money, they are less likely to want to bomb you. Different from just handing out money to be my friend. Making money with your enemies keeps them honest and can possibly make them your friends. Ask drug dealers. I don't know if that was directly just about the plane, but I just saw that post and I wanted to highlight that before you responded.
Well, it was about the entire trip. Trump's trip to the Middle East was about investments. It was about business. In other words, look, I'm not going to come over here and hand you millions and billions of dollars through NGOs to get you to think differently and be my friend. I'm coming over here to say, do you guys need airplanes? Yeah, we need fighter jets. Okay, we'll sell you the fighter jets. We need some oil. We need this. We need that. So that was his trip. He's basically saying his mentality is these people are our enemies. They don't like us, but enemies do business together all the time. And if everyone's doing well, people are less apt to want to kill you. And that's kind of what he's saying. Now, that doesn't mean that people with an ideological point of view won't still want to kill you, but the regimes are less likely to mess up that business relationship. So that's what that post was about. But to Charlemagne's point, my thing is this: I don't really care. I get the argument, but I don't care. Senator Mark Wayne just came out, and he was on Jake Tapper last night, and he said the negotiation for this plane started under the Biden administration a year ago, I believe, that they started negotiating with Qatar for this plane. Trump comes into office. Qatar just says, look, man, we're going to give it to you. Also being reported is this plane, Qatar was trying to sell it for years, and they couldn't sell it, so they're just giving it away. So it's something where, and like Emil said, Trump will never be in this plane because it's got to be retrofitted, it's got to be cleaned out, it's got to be all kinds of stuff, like Emil said, that has to be done to this plane. So whoever's president next, halfway through his term, possibly, he's going to get on this jet, and no one's going to bat an eye. No one's going to bat an eye. And so the idea that Trump is getting, that's right, that won't happen. Because he's going to put it in the presidential library, or his presidential library. So I take that back. But the idea that he's ever going to board this plane at any point during his presidency, everyone knows is not true due to what Emil just said. It's not going to happen fast enough. And then he's just going to put it in his presidential library like all presidents do with every gift that they get.
All right, makes sense. Again, we're tired of the propaganda. Listen to us. So thank you.
Montoya, real quick, I do have to make a small correction. The VC-25B is the current under construction Air Force One. The current actual operational Air Force One is the VC-25. I know that's minor, but I'm an Air Force guy, and I got to be accurate.
Accurate, though. I respect you. You have to be accurate based on who you are. So I have to respect you. All right, let me get to this next cut, brother.
The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at.
The government, the United States government, is actively looking at suspending due process and the rule of law. That's a big announcement. Big enough for Stephen Miller to risk bursting into flames because of the touch of God's sunlight.
The only time a president has done it unilaterally without the authorization of Congress was Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War.
That was the last. Really? So back when slavery was legal and the treatment for diarrhea was amputation. But that being said, this is a big announcement.
As you know, ability of somebody to challenge their rights in courts is a pretty essential part of the rule of law. So certainly raising a lot of eyebrows with that comment.
Just eyebrows? The Trump administration is thinking of tearing up the Constitution. So here in Washington, we're hearing a lot of, One legal scholar even said, that's weird.
Shelley, I'll let you respond. Obviously, we got the Daily Show. Again, as we mentioned already earlier, you got Jon Stewart's comedic spin on it. But that aside, it sounds like I should be concerned. And I say that sincerely from the standpoint of there's always been these constitutional pushes that you and Emil both have reminded me that to a degree, some of these things that we're seeing, Emil has broke down to me, is pretty normal for in a sense, the president to test the waters in this way. And the three branches of the government are supposed to, in a sense, push back on what's right and what's wrong. So I do understand that some things seem normal, but just this mention of letting go of habeas corpus does seem a little concerning for me. Jon Stewart, a comedic side aside. Go ahead, Shelley.
Let me say this. I say this on my show all the time. First of all, Stephen Miller bothers me, and he has since the very first term. There's something about him it feels like a guy that got beat up in high school and is now getting his revenge on the entire world. I don't like this at all. I also don't like it because it's being used to make the argument as to why you want to get people who are here illegally. And what concerns me is if you're using suspension of habeas corpus to do that, then you can use any kind of quote unquote emergency and try and validate that use of suspending habeas corpus for that. That's what concerns me. I know I know Republicans want to say it's an invasion, but we know that's factual. That's factual hyperbole. Yes, there's millions of people who are let in here. Yes, they flooded the border because they knew they can get in here, but it wasn't an invasion in the true sense of why you would want to suspend habeas corpus. The Chinese aren't coming over the border with tanks and troops. That's an invasion. Calling something because someone flooded the borders, a group of people flooded the borders because the previous administration didn't do anything once they got here and would grant them access, that's not necessarily an invasion. You can call it that, okay? And if you want to call it that, I would even politically go with it, calling it that. But don't use a political term meant to get votes to now stand in front of me to say, oh, we're being invaded, we need to suspend habeas corpus. No, dog, I'm not going with it. I don't agree with it. And it does concern me greatly.
Emil, I know you are a huge rule of law person, so I can't imagine just the simple mentioning of it, what this means for you, but I'll shut up and let you give us your thoughts about it as well.
Look, the writ of habeas corpus is a very special document, part of the Constitution. It allows me, if I'm being detained by the federal or even state government or local authorities, I have to be charged and I have to have my day in court. And when you suspend the writ of habeas corpus, you can detain me indefinitely without charging me. I don't get a day in court. I don't get due process. I get none of those. So when President Lincoln suspended it in 1861, which he did unilaterally, which caused a huge controversy even during the Civil War, to the point where Congress eventually passed the Suspension of Habeas Corpus Act in 1863, which authorized the president to do it in a proper and formal way. That is the only time we should ever see anything like that, and it should be incredibly specific. And what I fear, what I'm seeing in the news, reported by lots of different sources on the left and right, is that the federal government is widely overstepping its boundaries, trying to detain undocumented immigrants. And what's the difference between an invasion? There's got to be enmity and there's got to be some armed forces. Otherwise, it's just trespass. And remember, most immigration laws are civil laws, they're not criminal laws. So these are problems that we can face using non-military means. When you see tanks, soldiers, guns, I almost understand when they say the cartels are an invasion because of the violence they wreak on the border. That makes more sense to me, but that's a very targeted use of the word invasion and the context. But otherwise, to just say it's all an invasion and we're going to suspend the writ of habeas corpus means that any authority anywhere has the right to detain you without charging you, without due process, and can do so indefinitely. No, thank you.
No, thank you for those thoughts. This is actually a good segue into me. I'm about to read President Trump's tweet. I'm sorry, X, I guess whatever you call it on X now. I still call it tweets. I'm about to read that out loud and share it on the screen here. And I definitely want to get y'all thoughts on this. And I want to kind of highlight last week's show, Emil, where we had Leo on, and we were talking about the immigration issue, and we were trying to really narrow down, in my opinion, and I attempting to explain how the propaganda really confuses us as African Americans. So I think this tweet specifically speaks to our community, and I want to hear y'all thoughts on it. And again, this is just I'm going to read this out loud, just so that everybody has the context. This is from Donald Trump. He says, big case today in the United States Supreme Court. Birthright citizenship was not meant for people taking vacations to become permanent citizens of the United States of America and bringing their families with them all the time, laughing at the suckers that we are. The United States of America is the only country in the world that does this. For what reason, nobody knows, but the drug cartels love it. We are, for the sake of being politically correct, a stupid country, but in actuality, this is the exact opposite of being politically correct and is yet another point that leads to the dysfunction of American birthright citizenship. It is about the baby of slaves. As conclusive proof, the Civil War ended in 1865. The bill went to Congress less than a year later in 1865 and was passed shortly after that. It had nothing to do with illegal immigration for people wanting to scam our country from all parts of the world, which they have done for many years. It had to do with the Civil War results and the babies of slaves who our politicians felt correctly needed protection. Please explain this to the Supreme Court of the United States again. Remember, the Civil War ended in 1865 and the bill goes to Congress in 1866. We didn't have people pouring into our country from all over South America and the rest of the world. It wasn't even a subject. What we had were the babies of slaves. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Good luck for this very important case. God bless the USA. Emil, we're going to start with you, if you will. Add some context and explain from what you know, what is this case so that people have a full context before you give your response, if that makes sense.
For sure. So what's happening is the president signed an executive order that says that a person who is not properly legally in the United States, when they have a baby, that child should not be treated as a citizen of the United States by the executive branch, right? So there's a lot of language in that. And so that executive order effectively removes what's called birthright citizenship. That's Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. And the problem here is that if you want to change that, the Supreme Court can change that through an interpretation, or Congress can do it by writing a law. But it can't be done by an executive order. What the executive order's job is to tell the executive branch how to execute the law, right? And so he's saying something that is untrue. The case in front of the Supreme Court is manyfold. It's more than one element. And the one thing that they're first adjudicating on is, should a judge in one of the circuits around the country, there are 14 circuits around the country, if I remember correctly, should a judge in one of the circuits be able to say to the nation at large, hey, stop, this is an injunction. This executive order is null and void until we properly go through the process of interpreting it through the courts. Should that one judge be able to affect all of the nation in this case? And so this is now at the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's actually looking at two things in this case. One, birthright citizenship, which it may or may not adjudicate on, but it's absolutely going to adjudicate on whether a circuit court judge or board, a panel of judges has the right to say to the nation, this problem, this injunction manifests across everywhere. So the two things are happening simultaneously, and none of us knows exactly which way the Supreme Court's going to rule on both or just one of the two, because they may want to have an explicit birthright citizenship case to go forward. But we're absolutely going to learn about the injunction part of this.
And so we see the president using social media in a sense to throw out some influence towards the court. Shelley, you were a big fan of that tweet. And from my layman's perspective, I'm a fan of it too, based on how I read it, but I don't understand all the legalities as well as Emil.
Well, what Emil said is true. The Supreme Court is not necessarily arguing whether birthright citizenship, but what this gets to the heart of is the argument of using that clause in the 14th Amendment to where we have gotten to right now, where people are here and people are having babies. And so what he's doing in that tweet, he's not arguing what the Supreme Court is arguing at this moment. He's throwing out a kind of what you do when it's politically, he's throwing out the idea that, hey, part of the reason why we're here in this space now doing what we're trying to do, which is get people out of here who are here illegally, part of the way they're here and people are being are still here is because they're having babies. So in this particular instance, he's not talking about today. He's talking about the dreamer that's here now. For instance, there's a young lady, I don't agree with what happened to her, but he's talking about the 19-year-old who got pulled over making a left at a stop sign without putting on her blinkers and found out she didn't have a license and her parents were illegal and she was born here. And so they detained her. He's talking about that. He's saying, look, this was never intended to be about people coming here, dropping a baby, and then, oh, my baby's now a citizen. The Supreme Court, to Emil's point, is he's absolutely right. They are arguing something entirely different. What he's throwing out there is what we call hey, while you're looking at this, can we get a decision at some point on this thought? Because what they decide on, based on what Emil said, what they decide on could draw lawsuits or cases to talk about what you do with the people who are born here to illegal immigrants that we are better known as dreamers. So let me explain. And we as African American, I don't want to make this race because it's not really necessarily about race. Someone could say it is, but it's not really. We as African Americans should be in our thought process, and I'm not trying to be hateful or mean-spirited. I'm just speaking pragmatically. When a country was growing, it needed people to come here. Remember, we're not a foundational civilization country. China's been here for thousands of years. England, France, I'll say African nations. Maybe the lines are different because they drew them, right? But there are places that have been here literally since the dawn of time, right? And not long after the dawn of time, let's say, right? America's 250 years old, and we were a new nation, and we had to accept everybody that came in order to grow. We had to accept everybody that came to have employees, to have workers, to have everything. At this point, if you're an African American, at this point, you should be looking at any kind of new people coming here as a threat. And we can't keep saying we don't do those jobs, because if we have economic problems in our community, if we have a lack of resources in our community, if we have a lack of jobs in our community, if all these economic and socioeconomic pathologies exist in our community, then we don't want anybody here to compete with or to drive us further away from the top portions of what's going on in this country. And so I think that's really the way I see it. We're good. We got people here, love them, but accepting new people and fighting for new people to stay here is complete suicide to the regular man it's necessary to the politician, but it's complete suicide to a regular working man and woman.
Let me play this cut right here.
I tend to agree. The problem is that the 14th Amendment is very clear. It says persons. It doesn't say citizens, and that's the problem that I think But that
President next
Trump
line,
wants to get at.
That next line said, or in a jurisdiction thereof, which means you're a citizen. So if you're under the jurisdiction thereof, so that's kind of. I'm not saying you're right and I'm right because we're not.
I want to. I'm not
going to let us because I got two more cuts. I'm not going to bog down.
I got to get off at one, Montoya.
Okay, yeah, I definitely want to have you.
Can I say
want
something?
You got 5 minutes. I want you to respond to this.
Let me just say
the
this,
racism dog whistle here. I guess not really a dog whistle. It is a bullhorn.
The president's first day in office on January 20th of this year, he issued an executive order that paused U.S. refugee programs. That pause, of course, was subject from the very beginning to exceptions where it was determined that this would be in the interest of the United States. Some of the criteria are making sure that refugees did not pose any challenge to our national security and that they could be assimilated easily into our country.
Making sure they can be assimilated easily into the country. Let's see if we can figure that one out. The South African Afrikaners, quite a few of those in the administration, Elon Musk, David Sachs. Why do we think the Afrikaners could be assimilated into our culture more easily than those fleeing persecution from other countries, say Afghanistan or Africa or Venezuela? Because it is absolutely appalling to argue that Neri, the guy with the autism awareness tattoo, who was working his ass off at a bakery in Texas and volunteering to help kids with autism on the side, has not assimilated into this country and needs to be sent to a fucking concentration camp with no due process. But these Afrikaners, they're going to assimilate just fine. Want to see more of this video? Head to thebulwark.com or check out the Bulwark's YouTube channel right now. I'll see you there.
Comes from, as you heard, Bulwark. Shelley, I know you only have a few minutes, but just wanted to give a response. I wanted to highlight before you give a response. Again, if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. So naturally, that person, in his opinion, Bulwark, I don't know who he is, but and I talk about this just for people to understand this. People use extremes, and I'm not saying what happened to the guy that he's talking about is okay, kind of like Shelley said about the other guy. I'm not saying it's okay, but just be aware of when somebody's posing up against an extreme as the example to make their point. Just be aware of what they're attempting to do. And I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just asking people to be aware of that if we're going to be the politically conscious show. Shelley, your thoughts? I know you got to go, so give us a thought to that and you can get out of here.
Here's my problem. You signed an executive order suspending all refugee programs. And then you did the opposite by bringing in 59 people. I don't go with the numbers. I was with you when you signed an executive order suspending all refugee programs, because part of you signing that executive order, because NGOs were involved and we're doing waste, fraud, and abuse. And we were trying to figure out, let's get to the bottom of who's coming in here. Because if an NGO is crooked and they're bringing in so-called refugees, you don't know who is a refugee and who is not, because no one's being vetted because they're coming in under the refugee status program. So I would say, yes, good job, Mr. Trump, for signing that executive order, suspending all refugee programs. But when you go back on that for 59 people, then I've got to ask the question is, well, were these people under direct threat of their lives like other refugees are, because they're actually fleeing war and everything else? And so people will tell me, well, yeah, they were going to take their farms and bludgeoning and killing them. They were going to be attacked. Well, that happens every day. Hell, should old mama and them in Pittsburgh neighborhood of Atlanta, who got her door kicked in the other night and home invaded, be moved to Buckhead as a refugee because she's under attack in the city of Atlanta? I mean, this is pathological and it's ridiculous. And I think they said the loud part out loud. can be assimilated into the country. And I don't think that's necessarily racist. I think it's what they're doing, and they're not hiding it. And I don't think my outrage is. So let me phrase it like this: I'm outraged at the idea that you change your policy for one group of people. I'm outraged at the fact that you kind of lied to me and said you weren't going to do these refugee programs anymore. I'm outraged at the fact that you think these people are more victims than anybody else in the entire world who's actually in the middle of war every day, right? That's my problem with it. But at the same time, you told me the truth of why you're doing it. Like, you didn't hide it. So that takes away the idea of it being nefarious in any way, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
I follow the logic on that. I definitely that's actually a perspective I hadn't thought about. I know you got to go.
Most of my perspectives you never think about.
No, it's all to the good. That's funny.
Well, let me say this. I just want to say this jokingly.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we do this, you know what the hardest part for me, because I was chewing my fingernails, so excuse me to my fellow panelists and also our list viewers. But at the same time, you got to understand, dog, I can't sit for an hour straight still. I can't. I never could. I'm very aware of that. I got bad grades in elementary school because I couldn't sit still.
I knew I was driving it. I was just like, find you another Twitch, not that one.
That's all. So you know what I mean. But
hey, let me read this real quick. I think you want to hear it before you go. This is from one of my other watchers, one of my actual mental dialogue members. I'm gonna matter of fact, let me part of what happened with the South African 59 is partly being led by false white genocide claims. They became central to Trump's view of South Africa. And one of my watchers smartly, I thought this was very smart what he said. He said, so let me get this straight. Trump cuts all aid to South Africa, lets white South Africans in as refugees, parrots conspiracy theories about the so-called white genocide. And now President Ramaphosa, I don't know how to say his name, is flying to the U.S. to patch things up. This ain't diplomacy. It's strategic gaslighting. While Black South Africans still fight to reclaim stolen land post-apartheid, 7% of the population owns 72% of the farmland, but they get asylum. Meanwhile, Musk and his AI puppet Grok keep pushing these twisted narratives, and the U.S. agencies are told to freeze support to South Africa's G20 summit. He says this is racial chess on a global board, and folks better wake up before they're checkmated. I just wanted to let you hear that.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you go for you.
To that post. One, it's kind of like, it's not conspiracy theories that have been reported like in the South African news media of farmers and their families being slaughtered and their farms taken. It's happened in Zimbabwe, South Africa. In Zimbabwe, the government took the land. And by the way, after that, Zimbabwe fell into a famine because the people who took the land had no idea how to farm. But in South Africa, it's not government, but there have been reported stories in the South African press over the last few years of farmers being killed. So that's a fact. I'm not saying it's a widespread occurrence, but it has happened. To say it's a conspiracy theory is kind of the far side of the other side.
That's what we're here, right? To get through the propaganda. So thank you for that.
So the other thing is that has to be said is, remember, and there's always context. I always tell people, if you listen to my show, I'm on the right, but I live in the gray when it comes to my opinions and my commentary. I live my whole life in the gray, meaning that everything is not black or white, right? And I don't mean that racially. I just mean that as opposite sides.
To your point, to the point you're making.
So my point is that remember, it was a South African South Africa as a country, the only country in the world that called for Israel to be punished for the genocide at the UN. They started that ball rolling, and it was their foreign minister, the sister, that went to the UN and made this case for Israel to be prosecuted and Netanyahu to be arrested for genocide. So we have to keep that in mind when you talk about sanctions and you talk about what's going on in South Africa. Then lastly, what I want to say is, if you're an African American and you know that 7% of 70% of the land is owned by only 7% of the population, and white farmers want to leave South Africa, you should be jumping up and cheering. See, what we tend to do is we react to something that we're seeing while at the same time forgetting our complaints. You know, in that text that was posted, I can't see it, but she said, I've heard this before, only 7%, 7% of the people own 70% of the land. Okay, well, some of that 70% want to leave. Yay, kick them the you-know-what out. Ramaphosa should not be coming to America to smooth things over unless he's coming to say whatever to get his aid back. But other than anybody that thinks South African farming is racist should want these people out so they can take the land back. So you should want more farmers let go from South Africa so you can get 100% of the land into black hands that it was stolen from. It's the easiest way to do it without violence because you got someone doing it for you. So I say that just to say, I always reminded what Montoya always says. All I ask is that you think.
And that's what we do here. Emil, your thoughts? I know, Shelly, I know you got to go, so I want to respect
go. Emil, talk to you later, big brother.
All right, man. I appreciate you, brother.
Shameless plug, Montoya.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Next Saturday at the Jazz Festival Atlanta is next Saturday all weekend. But I'll be out there next Saturday. I got food, got liquor. I'll be sharing with you the location, and you can share it with all your people. I got food. All I ask people to do is bring a side or a dessert, and bring what you drink. Because when you bring what you drink, you always know it's there.
I like it. Good show, brother. Thank you for your time. I got one more clip for you, Emil, but go ahead and respond to what you just heard from Nico, one of our watchers.
This policy, I think Black South Africans will ultimately be the beneficiary of it. I was looking at some news around like the BBC, a couple of polls. The Afrikaner party that represents most white South Africans has not said it's a genocide, and they're very far right. And the other thing is that right now we have 59 or 60 refugees. There are only at most about 70,000 people who have expressed interest in leaving South Africa out of about 2.5 million Afrikaners in the nation. So there is a small group of people who may end up moving here, a few hundred, maybe 1,000 or two. But honestly, we have to look at this as the way Shelley did, and I think he was right to challenge it. What's your policy? What's your policy? Is your policy refugees and asylum or not? If it is, great. If it isn't, if you're doing it, rolling it out nation by nation and South Africa is the first nation, okay, say that. You know, the thing is that this administration likes to do things like piecemeal and then not tell you what's happening until after it's happened, which just causes more uncertainty. So in South Africa, there's going to be, there is turmoil. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, I've been to South Africa, was there last year. I saw what it looks like in Cape Town. And I understand why Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to figure out the best way to move those lands back into Black hands. Those Black people who want those lands, if they're going to maintain the export quality of agriculture, are going to need training. So there's supposed to be a transition plan for those lands that are going from white to Black so that they maintain that agricultural output. That's a huge part of the process. And that law was passed last year in 2024. So we'll see how all this plays out. But it looks like it's a very limited exception. I read the policy on the U.S. Consulate for South Africa website, and it is pretty much what you expect it to be. It's very much about the racial minorities coming out of South Africa and coming to America.
All right, I promised I had this on the promotion, so we're going to at least get to it. I don't have a lot of time. I got to get out of here myself. But this is, I'm going to read this as it plays. And this is what a white man had to say about the Rodney Hinton Jr. situation. Pretty sure everybody that's watching already knows that's the brother who ran over the cop after his son was shot and killed by another cop. But this is what a white man had to say, and Shelley had put this on his page. That's how I saw it. So I hate that we don't have Shelley for it. But this is, as I always say, extra innings on the show. So let's get into this last cut, and we'll get out of here. So Kristen Search says, as a white man, Let me say this. Rodney Hinton didn't lose control. He finally took some back. The system murdered his son, shot down an 18-year-old over a stolen car, claimed he pointed a gun, and then couldn't give back a solid body cam. They watched that boy die, gave his father the footage, and basically said, now get over it. You expect him to go home and pray on it. You expect him to light candles and write signs while the same system gears up to do it again to somebody else's kid next week. Ha! He hit back. And now everyone's crying about the cop he ran over, a retired deputy, as if that is the real tragedy here. Funny how people suddenly care about life when it's one of your own in uniform, but when it's a grieving black father begging for justice, you label him a threat. This country was built on retaliation, on rebellion, on don't tread on me. But let a black man fight back, and suddenly it's terrorism. Nah, that's rage you created. That's grief this system signed, scaled, and delivered. I'm not saying what Rodney did was legal. I'm saying it was understandable. And I'd rather live in a world full of Rodney Hintons than another one where cops keep walking free after burying somebody's baby. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Tough situation.
I hate this. I hate it for the father, because now his son is dead and now he's likely going to go to prison. I hate it for the police officer and his family. But this nation is due a reckoning on how the police treat citizens of the community. And that reckoning has to happen systemically. That reckoning is why there are people who are mentally unstable and are pushed over the edge to do things that should be unconscionable. That lack of reckoning has built into our psyches the thought that a police officer fearing for their safety but making a mistake is acceptable. And there are those who have seen and witnessed and have been victimized by law enforcement officers who have absolutely abused their power with impunity. And this nation, in my opinion, has to come to grips with how it polices, especially the marginalized, the oppressed, and the exploited, how it polices Black families, Black people, how it polices itself, because we're not seeing what should be justice. And Rodney Hinton Jr. is a symptom of a larger problem. And that is that in the absence of actual justice, his skewed view of the world led him to believe this is what justice looks like. And I could say more about how he looked at those officers who lined up and tried to intimidate him, and how he stood and looked back at them the way he did. But I'll just say that as a symptom of a larger problem, we must begin to address, or we will see more of this in a way that we have never seen before. People are tired of not being heard. They're tired of burying their children and their fathers and their mothers. They're tired of not having the rules apply across the board. And until we start to see some reform, people are going to start to take matters in their own hands, and I hope they do not.
Yep, I saw a great comparison by one of my other longtime listeners, Donald Atchison. He just highlighted the difference in the response to, was it Mazzoloni? Am I saying his name right?
Luigi Mangione, yeah.
Yeah, that if you put them in context, the reason, the reaction, if we're honest about the difference in the reaction, it is closely associated to what you just talked about. And I thought that was a great comparison for people to think about, that, hey, that there is some group, not that all the people do, that held him as some type of hero for his pushback against the corporation. But his point is, in effect, it's the exact same reasoning, unfortunately, to a much more detrimental situation, considering there's one dead and one possibly, as you say, about to spend life in prison over what you're talking about. And that's just having honest context about what we're seeing. And it really speaks to it for anybody who's not understanding, who's watching at this point, and not understanding, as Christian Search pointed out, it's understandable if you're honest about the historical context of the relationship with the police and the Black and brown communities. It has been a very different experience, and it's not justifying anything, but it'll be dishonest and disingenuous to not recognize that the context of that relationship is so different from the majority of Americans that if you cannot understand it, you're living in a false, made-up world. That's not the reality for the African American experience. That is often, unfortunately, our reality, and sometimes due to trauma, we overstate that, we're oversensitive to it because of that long-standing history. That's a reality, again, not justifying, but like Christian Search said, if that's not understandable, you're not trying to see reality. That's how I'll close this show. Thank you for your time, brother. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. Till next pop-up, y'all. We'll see y'all again.